Hello and welcome to another episode of Katie the Science Lady. I'm Mrs. Jacobson and today's topic is eukaryotic cells and their organelles. So let's learn together. All right, let's start talking about eukaryotic cells and their organelles. So first off, what is a eukaryote? We probably haven't heard of this word outside of biology class, and even then it's still kind of undefined. So eukaryotes are cells of plants, animals, or funguses like mushrooms. And they contain a nucleus and organelles. This should kind of ring something around in your head. It's essentially the opposite of prokaryotes, which we talked about last time. Prokaryotes do not have a nucleus and they do not have an organelle. So we said that pro says no to a nucleus and organelles. On the flip side, we can say that euks have a nuke. That's my favorite way to say it. Or you could say that U equals do, or U does have a nucleus. But however you remember it is really up to you. Now organelles. There's something else we haven't spoken about quite so detailed yet. Organelles act like cellular machines. For lack of a better term, they perform some really specific functions in the cell. And those functions usually fall into a couple of categories. They may synthesize new molecules by making new molecules, they may protect the cell, they may help with storage of nutrients or wastes, or they may act as transporters and move important materials in and around the cell and out of the cell as well. Now let's talk about the two types of eukaryotic cells. We have animal cells, like are found in you and me, and plant cells, which are found in, you guessed it, plants. Animal cells do not have a cell wall, which makes sense. If you look at us, we're not super rigid. We don't have like tree trunks for arms and legs. We're a little more organic, a little more soft. We don't have cell walls. We have small vacuoles. We don't need to store a lot of water at one time in each of our cells like plants would. We don't have chloroplasts. Unfortunately, we cannot use sunlight to make sugar for ourselves. We don't just get to lay out in the sun and make sugar when the sun shines on our skin, although that would be pretty handy. And our cells are round in shape. That's what makes us have the ability to have such rounded forms and figures. On the flip side, plant cells do have a cell wall. That's why they can grow so tall. It's why trees grow hundreds of feet high. They have large vacuoles. They have to be able to store a lot of water at a time. Plant cells can't just walk to the sink and get a drink whenever they want. They have to wait for the water to fall from the sky. They have chloroplasts to help them make plant food, as I like to call it. They're turning sunlight into sugar cells, or glucose. And then they have a rigid geometric shape that lets them stack on top of each other so that they can grow tall without the need for bones or internal structures like that. I want to go over a couple of the main parts of eukaryotic cells. And you'll notice that I've got a couple of these little symbols here in the top of each of the squares. That's going to refer to the type of organism that they're going to be found in. This over here is a prokaryote or bacterial symbol, and you can see the cell membrane is part of a bacterial cell. We've got an animal cell here, our little round cell, and we've got this kind of rigid shaped cell with a thick wall called the plant cell. So that's how you would notate that. The cell membrane we've already talked about. It controls movement of substances into and out of the cell. It's only going to let some things in and keep other things out. In our last video, I talked about how the cell wall, for me, is kind of like the wall of a castle, or maybe the moat around the castle. It's something there to protect the cell and only let certain things in and out. Next up, we have the cytoplasm. That's found in bacteria, animal cells, and plant cells as well. And it's kind of a strange one. The cytoplasm is really there to fill the space of the cell, make sure it doesn't fall in on itself and kind of turn to goop. And it's also there to help chemical reactions happen. It has a lot of nutrients that may fill that space to help those reactions happen in much quicker ways. The nuclear membrane is something that is only found in eukaryotes, in plant and animal cells, and its job is to control what enters and exits the nucleus. It is a membrane, that word that we see with cell membrane. It's the same concept, just for the nucleus, and we'll talk about that in a moment. The nucleus is the control center of the eukaryotic cell. Its job is to contain the DNA, or our genetic material, so that it can't get damaged, it's used properly, and so it stays in a nice stored, contained area for a long period of time. That DNA gets used to make proteins throughout our entire cell that's going to tell our cell what to do and how to do it. So it really is like a control center. If the nucleus and the cell were a city, we would call it City Hall. It's where decisions get made. It's where important documents are stored. Next up, the ribosomes. Those are found in prokaryotes, animal cells, and plant cells. We've talked about them before. They are where protein synthesis happens, or where proteins are made. And they're found in a couple of places. We have what are called free ribosomes, which are floating in the cytoplasm, and they'll make some proteins there. We also have proteins that are going to be embedded in the surface of something called the rough endoplasmic reticulum, which is another organelle. And they perform the same function there. They make more proteins. We have vacuoles that are found in animal cells and plant cells. Although we did say they are much smaller in animal cells, plant cells is really where they shine. They are large in plant cells. They are there for cell storage. They're there to hold water, nutrients, waste, anything that the cell needs it to hold, it will. And it also helps keep plant cells rigid. If you've ever had a flower that's wilted over because it hasn't been exposed to water, that's because the vacuole is actually losing that water to the cell. So if the vacuole shrinks, the plant will wilt. As soon as you water that plant again, it pops back up because that vacuole fills back up. We have lysosomes that are found mainly only in animal cells. They may be found in a couple of plant cells, but they have a very minor role. They have enzymes that break down our cellular waste. I like to think of them kind of as the trash men of our cells. They take all these kind of either toxins or waste products and they package them up and they kick them out of the cell, which is nice for us. We don't want that waste to build up in our cells. It would make us sick. Then we have the endoplasmic reticulum. We already talked about the rough endoplasmic reticulum and how it helps with making proteins. But the smooth endoplasmic reticulum, we can tell it looks smooth over here. It doesn't have any ribosomes embedded in it. We don't see those little polka dots in the smooth endoplasmic reticulum. And its job is to synthesize lipids. Another name for lipids is fats. Mitochondria, this may be something you've heard before. They are the powerhouse of the cell. For some reason, that's the one thing that every biology student remembers from the beginning of time when they had mitochondria. But their job is to produce ATP, which is cellular energy. ATP is actually called adenosine triphosphate, but I'm never going to make my students spell that out for me. ATP works for me. And it's a process called cellular respiration, and that happens actually when we breathe in and out. It's found in animal and plant cells as well, and it is the main way that animal cells produce energy. We have the Golgi apparatus, which is another organelle found in animal and plant cells. Its job is honestly kind of like the post office or FedEx. It sorts, packages, and ships products all around the cell. Whether they're different kinds of fats, whether they're amino acids or proteins, it's going to ship things that the cell makes to all the different parts of the cell. And these little tiny kind of bubbles here are called vesicles. And they're able to travel and then fuse so that they can get rid of their products wherever they need to. We have the cell wall, which we talked about briefly. It provides structure and support for prokaryotes as well as plant cells. We can see on the inside here there's usually a plasma membrane or a cell membrane, especially in the case of our plant and prokaryotes. It does allow some things through from cell to cell, but mainly that cell membrane or plasma membrane, same thing, is going to be making the decisions on what is allowed into the cell and what is kept out. The cell wall is mostly just for support. Chloroplasts are our very specialized structure. You'll notice we're down to only the plant cell here. They are there to produce glucose via a process called photosynthesis. If we break down this word here, photo means light, syn means together, and thesis is the creation of something. So we're making something together with light, which is exactly what happens. Light hits these structures and it's going to be turned into glucose by the cell. This is why plants just need to be outside. You don't have to feed them actual food. You may supplement them with like plant food, but they just need sunlight, water, and they need nutrients from the soil, and they need carbon dioxide from the air. But that's their main role. Let's recap. Eukaryotic cells have a nucleus and membrane-bound organelles.
I like to remember it with a rhyme. Euks have a nuke. This goes along with the other rhyme that I had, pro says no to a nucleus and organelles. Eukaryotic cells make up the majority of organisms on the planet, just like you and me, and we break them down into plant and animal cells. And there are a couple of main differences. Plant cells have a cell wall for protection, and they also have chloroplasts, which are there to help them turn sunlight into sugar. In our next video, I'm going to compare and contrast eukaryotic cells and prokaryotic cells. So until next time, I hope you had fun, I hope you learned something, and I'll see you later.